playoff rankings, which are coming out at noon Eastern on Sunday. But first, we have conference titles to decide, and we are proud to bring you the Big Ten title game tonight between Penn State and Oregon, 4v1. The Ducks trying to record their first 13-0 season in program history and win the Big Ten in their inaugural season in the conference. Penn State looking for their second Big Ten title. They beat Wisconsin back in 2016 for the title. Both programs recording the most wins in their regular seasons this year. What type of game are you expecting to see tonight?
Well, I can't wait to see the first-timer against the old-timer, Penn State. And really, you go into this game, I'm really wanting to see if Penn State can challenge Oregon in the trenches. You know, I saw Oregon earlier this year when they beat Ohio State. And the big thing in that game for me was Dylan Gabriel going deep, being able to take shots. Penn State's defense, I think, even though they're ranked behind Ohio State in a lot of categories, is better equipped to slow Dylan's passing game.
And we'll see what kind of wrinkles get thrown in tonight for these two coaches. Elsewhere, hopefully there will be no bottle throwing in the rematch between number 2 Texas and number 5 Georgia as they meet for an SEC title. Brandon, it's hard to beat any team twice in a season, but after a decade of underachieving, Steve Sarkisian has a chance to go 1-for-1 in SEC title games. Is there more pressure on Texas here or Georgia here?
I think there's more pressure on Texas. And I say that because they were the ones who were beaten in the first matchup, and they looked listless offensively, especially running the ball. Georgia kind of figured them out with their defense there, but Texas has had time to figure things out here. I think Texas just needs to be calm and don't try to go about with the quarterback carousel. Don't be herky-jerky there if Quinn Ewers is struggling. I know everybody loves Arch Manning, but don't go him too quickly if he has a couple of sacks early and looks hesitant.
Yeah, that might be a little wrinkle that Sark throws in there as you look at Texas and their time trailing this season. I mean, versus Georgia, over 45 minutes. Everybody else, under 8 minutes.
What a stat.
What a stat that is, yeah, to see that.
I mean, and listen, and that just shows you just how good Georgia can be.
Yeah.
To shut a team down like Texas the way they did, that has been unstoppable against everybody. I can't wait to see, as you said, some of the wrinkles Steve Sarkisian's kind of developed here because he's got Georgia on tape now. He's a master tactician. I can't wait to see what he does.
It's so tough to beat a team twice in the season, as you saw in that graphic, regular season and then in the title game. All right, over in the Big 12, Iowa State squares off with Arizona State. Look, we saw Iowa State getting here, but I don't think anyone saw Arizona State getting here. 5 straight wins. Yeah. How do you like this matchup for a title game?
It worries me for Arizona State. They're without their top receiver, responsible for 1,100 yards in this game. Yeah. But listen, you still got Cam Sketibo. I mean, he is an incredible running back. The issue, though, with Iowa State, though, is Rocco Becht struggling a little bit just as far as completion percentage. But he's a gamer. And if this game comes down in the fourth quarter, I like Iowa State. They're the more veteran team. That's the reason why we were picking them to win the Big 12 this year. And I really like Iowa State in this game, considering Arizona State being down their biggest threat.
Lots at stake in the ACC title game. Conference debutantes SMU facing Clemson after the Tigers backdoored their way into the title game. What do you expect the difference to be in this game?
Well, to me, I think everybody's discounting what SMU can do defensively. They've all year long been one of the best defensive lines in the ACC. If they can frustrate Cade Klubnik and continue to slow down that Clemson run game, which has been struggling a little bit. Phil Maffa has been injured. He hasn't scored a touchdown, I believe, in 3 or 4 straight games. SMU's defensive line is the key in this game. If Clemson can find a way around it, they win. If SMU finds a way to slow that run game for Clemson and put the pressure on Cade Klubnik, I like SMU.
And Dabo Swinney saying this week, a couple of his players that are, you know, a little bit dicey going into the game. Phil Maffa is one of them. We'll, of course, be monitoring his status. So we have a couple of other games we want to mention. Just the battle for Ohio. Ohio and Miami of Ohio in conference championship over in the MAC. And someone make sure that we're doing welfare checks on Emory Hunt today. If the Raging Cajuns get behind versus Marshall. That, of course, is the game, the title game in the Sun Belt. All right, let's get you to some Mayotivations presented by Hellmann's, America's #1 mayonnaise. A lot of eyes on that Big 12 title game because of what it could mean for the college football playoff picture. It's win and in, isn't it? Is it safe to say that?
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, the Big 12 champ is going to be in. They're not going to get a first-round bye because Boise State has solidified that in the eyes, I'm sure, of the committee right now. But what a story for Arizona State and Iowa State this year. Iowa State had really been kind of hanging on in some games. They should have lost to UCF at home earlier this season, but they've made their way into the Big 12 championship as much of us expected. And there's a lot to be said about an Iowa State team, to me, that had all this pressure to expect to get in the Big 12 because they're a veteran team. Meanwhile, you see what happens to other teams that we thought would consider there. Oklahoma State, they went 0 in the Big 12 this year despite having the oldest college offensive line in history. Iowa State managed to get here because they've got a gamer at quarterback and Rocco Becht, and that is a dangerous thing to have if you get in a playoff. So don't discount. I'm saying this right now. I know Arizona State's got a shot here. They'll probably be my pick at the hint here. But Iowa State, with a gamer at quarterback, could be a really frustrating team in the playoff.
And you saw in the latest bracket there, Arizona State, the one that facing a road playoff game versus Penn State. A lot of ink spilled over the past few weeks over what the ACC's role in the college football playoff should be and could be. Regardless of who wins the ACC title, should two teams get in the playoff? If Clemson loses to SMU, I mean, is that Miami's pathway in?
I don't want to talk about Miami. I just don't think Miami deserves to be in no matter what. But, hey, that's just me. To me, the ACC does deserve two teams in, and it should be Clemson and SMU if Clemson wins. So if Clemson loses this game, I think the ACC should only get one team, and that should be the ACC champion. What's really going to be interesting here is to watch, I think, what the committee does, because I've been looking at this over and over and over again. They'll end up dropping SMU if they lose this game, probably 3 to 4 spots, and that's a dicey subject right now as far as where they're going to be and if they could still sneak into the college football playoff. But to me, SMU has done enough at this point, and we'll talk more about this later in the show. But unless SMU just gets blown out here, how do you penalize a team for playing in an extra game and have to stick their necks out there and getting to the conference championship game when you're undefeated in the regular season in your conference?
Yeah, and that's something that Rhett Lashley alluded to this week. But I want to go back to Miami. Why not Miami? 10-2?
Well, listen, they don't own a win against a top 25 team at this point, and they've lost 2 of their last 3 games. I think in a lot of ways in this new playoff era, the committee, and I think they're showing a little bit of this, is that it depends on how you're playing lately. I compare it to the men's basketball tournament with the selection committee there, right? When we look in the past there, we go, hey, the last 10 games of the men's basketball tournament going into it, this team's been really hot. They deserve to have a closer look. That's why for teams like a South Carolina that's ended the season on this amazing road streak, including multiple top 25 wins, I give them more credence than, say, a Miami. And right now, because of the way Miami has finished the season, I just don't see how you can get them to jump anybody. And the committee chairman, Ward Manuel, has said as much. We're not going to move these teams that are sitting at home.
Okay, so does the committee then just make it easy and say, okay, Clemson, you lost. We're not putting Miami in because they didn't make it to their title game. And as you mentioned, the resume's not there. So apples to apples, we'll go with Alabama.
Yes, and the big thing they'll hang their hat on there is that Alabama's 3-1 against the top 25. What they don't want to talk about is that they're got 2 losses against unranked teams right now, and I think that counters that 3-1 record. So let's make it 3-3 in a lot of ways there. But they've already played their hand. Alabama is in position to be that team with 3 losses to get in there over a 2-loss ACC team like in Miami right now. And I just listen. The playoff committee's just played their hand. They've already told us what they're going to do. And I think a lot of us are still questioning, like, no, they won't. Come on, they're not going to do that. But they've already said they're going to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to know, can college football take the ACC getting snubbed by Alabama 2 seasons in a row?
No. And Jim Phillips, I'm sure right now, is he's already campaigning, and the ACC commissioner. And when he goes in the press box tonight, I would corner every single person I can see to try and get some word down to Dallas to get the committee to rethink this. But, you know, there's a lot here because we talk about Alabama's resume.
Yeah.
And Ward Manuel says, hey, you know, these teams that are sitting at home, their standing can't be affected, right, based off of games that they're not involved in. All right, so what if Georgia, for example, wins the SEC title this year? Doesn't that actually help Alabama because Alabama beat them head-to-head? Doesn't that actually improve their resume? So on the same argument there, when we're looking at all this, they're saying, well, we can't jump a South Carolina over another team or whatever because they're not playing anybody. But it's like, but Clemson, who they just beat, is in the ACC championship game. So what if South Carolina gets an extra bump, so to speak, figuratively, because Clemson wins the ACC title. No, we're not going to change South Carolina's ranking. Same could be said about Alabama from that standpoint, and yet they're just like, no, they're out of data points. No, they're not. There's still games to be played that these teams have wins against.
Well, and last year, of course, we know the big hullabaloo was a year ago. First time in history, an undefeated Power 5 conference champion was kept out of the playoff, and it was made worse by SEC champion Alabama, a one-loss team put in instead of them. By the way, FSU head coach Mike Norvell will be available to counsel any team that does get the snub this year. That brings us to Tom Fornelli's forecast, because our Tom Fornelli has held his head in his hands a few times throughout this Illinois fandom that he has. So let's bring you in for some thoughts on what might lie ahead after the final rankings come out on Sunday. Tom, who will have their head in their hands post-reveal Sunday?
I think most of us will, honestly, when we try listening to the committee explain their decisions, because every single week they're changing their minds on what matters and what doesn't. But I think going into the weekend, if you're the committee, you're sitting in that room in Dallas watching the games today, you are rooting for SMU to beat Clemson, because it makes your life a lot simpler if that's the case. Then at that point, pretty much the rankings stay the same. You give Alabama that 12 seed and you move on with the rest of your day. If SMU loses, as you guys were talking about, that's when things will get interesting, because Clemson takes the automatic berth for the ACC, and then the question becomes, do we punish SMU for losing in a conference championship game and reward Alabama for not making its conference championship game? I might be naive based on what we saw last year with the committee when they put in Alabama over Florida State, despite Florida State being an undefeated ACC champion. But I do think if SMU loses to Clemson tonight, as long as they don't get the doors blown off and they make it a competitive game, I believe, just based on the actions, not the words of Ward Manuel and the committee, but the actions of what they've shown each week in their rankings, that SMU will remain in the field and it will be Alabama left out. But the politics of that decision would be very interesting, because if Alabama's left out, the SEC only has 3 teams in the field. And gentlemen, we know how this sport works. We know which 2 leagues are in charge of everything and running the leagues or the playoffs. So if the SEC only gets 3 teams in and Alabama's left out, it will be interesting to see what kind of levers Greg Sankey's pulling behind the scenes to change the format of this thing very quickly.
Well, and I guess the history in terms of the good news for SMU is that conference teams that have lost in the championship game typically only get dropped a couple of places, which would keep them in. But, Tom, as you've alluded to, we've seen the committee do some crazy things over the past few years. For you, though, which teams have punched their tickets no matter what happens today?
Yeah, you know, one of the great ironies of this new format is that while it, quote unquote, creates more games that matter during the season, I feel like there's a lot less drama when it comes to the Selection Sunday aspect of it, because so many teams, I feel like, have kind of clinched their spots. Even if we look at today's games, the only thing that really seems to be on the line are the seedings. Like Boise, I think we can very much confidently say is in after winning the Mountain West last night. But in the Big Ten title game, Oregon and Penn State, regardless of today's results, are in. The same thing we could say about Georgia and Texas. Teams at home, Ohio State, Tennessee, Indiana, these guys are all locked in. Notre Dame is locked in. For the most part, all of these spots are decided. It's just where are they going to be in the final bracket, and that's what we're going to see today. And then, like I said earlier, the only question is, will it be SMU or Alabama? Those are the 2 teams I feel like are bubble teams, quote unquote.
Fornelli's forecast with Tom Fornelli. Tom, part of the team that's going to be part of the Big Ten title game coverage tonight on CBS. So, Tom, always good to have you with us. Each of the Power 4 conference title games features inaugural members of their conference. And for Arizona State head coach Kenny Dillingham, it marks a remarkable turnaround, and he's managed to find a magic formula after a disastrous 2023 season. We're going to talk about the Big 12 title game in Arlington next. Welcome into your college football pregame show presented by Hellmann's, America's #1 mayonnaise. Coming into the 2024 college football season, a lot of questions as to how the new kids on the block in the conferences would fare. Well, take a look at this. Those questions have been answered, and the noobs could all be hoisting first-time titles on Saturday. One of them is already Army over in the American. So who says that conference realignment is a bad thing? Let's welcome in our Josh Pate, who's in Arlington, Texas, because I think he did say that it was a bad thing. He's for the Big 12 title game today, watching Arizona State and Iowa State. ASU perhaps the most surprising of the newbies, Josh, to get to their title game. But how are you viewing this overall, the new bloods versus the new bloods?
It's interesting. Now, I will forever, Jeremy, stand by my stance that I think 47 teams in conferences, some on the East Coast, some on the West Coast, playing, again, in conference is a really weird thing in a sport that's supposed to be regionally based. But that's for you and I to talk about in like March, and we do and we will. But as for the specific stories now, there was a guy who came on my show back in like April. We were doing bold predictions. And this guy said a newcomer will win every Power 4 conference. And I rated it on a 1 to 10 scale of boldness, a 10. I laughed at him. I mocked it. Do you know how nervous I am today, Jeremy? Look at how much my hand is shaking today. This could happen. We're a few short hours away. SMU could do it. Arizona State could do it. Oregon could do it. Texas could do it. So in that sense, I think you got to call it one of the bigger college football stories, not just this year, but in the last several years.
Josh, was that person he who shall not be named, Danny Cannell?
No. I said someone nailed a prediction, Jeremy. I didn't say someone made a prediction. Yeah, big difference.
Wow, okay, well, good thing Daddy's not listening. As mentioned, you're at the Big 12 title game. The current CFP rankings and the bracket have the Big 12 winner playing a first-round game and not getting the bye. Boise State getting the bye. But, Josh, in your opinion, should the Big 12 champion, a Power 4 team, get a first-round bye?
Yes, they should. No, they will not. You got to be really careful with the language you used. Or the language I use. So based on the way we go into this weekend and the way the committee's rankings look, as far as I was concerned, as long as Boise won by 1 point, they were good. They were going to have a first-round bye. Based on the way those rankings look, that's the way it should happen. There is an entire separate compartment where I have my own personal feel on how the rankings should have looked, and it's my belief that you can reward the Boise States of the world all you want to, but it's got to be congruent with reality. And the reality, as much as like, you know, the emotion in the room doesn't want to hear it, is there is a different caliber of strength of schedule you have in those conferences as opposed to even the Big 12. We're not talking about the Big 10 or the SEC. Even the Big 12's average conference strength of schedule is significantly more difficult than what you would face in a Mountain West. So that's not me telling you box them out, get the G5 out of here. But when we're talking about awarding a first-round bye, that's a different conversation. That is fundamentally altering not just the structure of the top 4, Jeremy, but then it's downstream. Then all of a sudden you look at who the 5 seed may face and who the 6 seed may face and how insanely different the second-round balance of power is. I would argue to you that when the dust settles tonight and we're looking at that bracket get settled tomorrow, you and I could very well be saying out of all the second-round matchups, the 1 seed could have the least favorable second-round matchup, and it'll be because we are arbitrarily giving away first-round byes to conference champs because we treat this like the NFL, where all conference champs are kind of awarded equally. They're viewed as sort of created equally. That's because they all play professional teams every week. So the schedule is roughly calibrated in terms of strength. That's not the case at the college level.
Certainly a great point, Josh, and certainly something that's going to be discussed as we head towards the rankings tomorrow. We have the Big 10 championship game tonight on CBS between number 4 Penn State and number 1 Oregon. Oregon favored by less than a touchdown. Josh, this is the first Big 10 title game since 2016 without a Michigan, without an Ohio State. Is this a bit of a changing of the guard in the Big 10, do you think?
I think it's a changing of the guard when it comes to Oregon, but I think that was sort of the case even going back to Big 10 media days. Jeremy, remember, we were up in Indianapolis multiple days, and a lot of the talk was, how will Oregon adjust to the Big 10? just like in the SEC, how will Texas and Oklahoma adjust? And I thought it was kind of short-sighted, or maybe just a halfway baked conversation, because there was another part of that should have sounded like this. How will the Big Ten adjust to Oregon? I mean, Oregon immediately, once they stepped foot in the Big Ten, was the #2 recruiting program and #2 talent roster in that conference, the only competition being Ohio State, who, by the way, they finished higher than in this last recruiting cycle, who they beat on the field this year already. So it's a changing of the guard. I don't even think maybe an Oregon needs to win it for it to be a changing of the guard. There's just another big mouth at the table that is going to gobble up a bunch of wins. Over on the Penn State side, though, if they were to win it, I think it's a much bigger story, Jeremy, because I think if, whether it's right or wrong, I think if Oregon wins this game tonight, it will be viewed as, congratulations, you won the Big Ten, but you didn't have to go through Ohio State a second time. Whether that's right or wrong, that's how people will frame it. If Penn State wins, they will be viewed as absolutely having gone through the same caliber of team that they haven't been able to get the job done against, your Ohio States and your Michigans in years past. It would be, I'm trying to think, I don't know that James Franklin would have had a bigger win in his career than if they beat Oregon today in the Big Ten championship game. So it's a changing of the guard in a sense that there's another big boy at the Big Ten table. And I think if Penn State wins this one, I still view them a little bit differently. You'd still need to recruit consistently at a higher level if you're Penn State to prove to me you'll annually go toe-to-toe with the Oregons, with the Ohio States. Oregon's there, though. I think Oregon's fully there.
Well, and that's one of the things that we've talked about all week is the fact that if Penn State was to win this game, it could be a program-altering win, taking down a #1 team in the country. Speaking of Oregon, they played in the Pac-12 title game last year and lost, so Dan Lanning is also trying to win that big game. What would a Big Ten title mean for Lanning and this Oregon program?
Well, I think it would shake up the entire structure. I think it would be good for the Big Ten, to be honest with you, Jeremy. I think a lot of times you just need the baseball bat to the face. That's a metaphor they were using for the Washington game last week. But I also think it would be metaphorical to what it would do to the conference. There's nothing like someone new walking into your house and immediately owning the house. And if Oregon and Dan Lanning walk in and they own the house by winning the thing, by winning the Big Ten championship, oh, it's huge validation for him. It's huge validation for the way they do things. But I want you to think beyond Eugene, Oregon, and think about the signal that it would send to everyone else. Because everyone else in the Big Ten sort of look down their nose at your Oregons and your USCs coming in saying, oh, they're going to have to adjust. There's that word again, they're going to have to adjust. Well, if their way of doing things, as it turns out, was good enough to win your conference right off the bat all along, maybe your conference needs to level up instead of Oregon needing to level up. And I remember being a kid in the South when Urban Meyer came to Florida. And everyone looked at him coming to Florida, Jeremy, and they said, man, the SEC's about to teach Urban Meyer a thing or two about how Southern football is played. Urban comes in and dominates at Florida. And what happened in the aggregate is Urban Meyer actually changed the way the SEC went about doing things. I think a Lanning and Oregon win could serve the same purpose in the Big Ten.
All right, Josh Pate joining us from Arlington, Texas, as he gets set for the Big 12 title game coming up at noon Eastern time. Thanks, Josh. And of course, for more from Josh, be sure you're checking out Josh Pate's College Football Show. It airs live on YouTube Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. All right, well, after building the best roster that money can buy, it was natty or bust when the season started for Ohio State. They're still on that trajectory, but after last week's ugly loss to Michigan, is it win or you're out for head coach Ryan Day? We'll discuss. And Boise State did what they needed to do, win the Mountain West. We'll show you how they did it and recap the other title games on Friday night next on your college football pregame show. College football pregame continuing here on HQ, presented by Hellman's, America's #1 mayonnaise. We had 3 conference title games on Friday night. A lot of eyes on this game. Boise State getting the job done versus UNLV in the Mountain West, winning it 21-7. Your man, Ashton Jeanty, going off 209 yards rushing as he tries to chase down Barry Sanders. He now sits 132 yards shy of Barry, but more importantly, Boise State get themselves a Mountain West title and potentially a first-round bye. Welcome back inside our HQ studios. Jeremy St. Louis alongside Brandon Marcello. You heard Josh Pate talk about it in the last segment. He thinks the Big 12 should get that first-round bye. What say you after what you saw from Boise State last night?
I think Boise State deserves it. Their one loss this season is against Oregon, the #1 team, undefeated team, and they took them to the wire, end up winning by 3 points. Boise State deserves that first-round bye. And in fact, depending on what happens today in the ACC championship game, they might even rise as high as the #3 seed.
Wow, you think they could actually rise depending on what happens?
I think so. Because of what might happen today in that ACC championship game and them staying ahead, of course, the Big 12 champion. Do they stay ahead of a Clemson as the champion as well? Do they get up to that #3 seed?
As you take a look at the bracket here, you see Boise State would be part of that first-round bye, taking on the winner of Arizona State and Penn State in that second round. What about Ashton Jeanty? I mean, Travis Hunter is the runaway favorite to win the Heisman, but for Jeanty, 132 yards away from chasing down Barry Sanders, there's going to be a lot of accolades for that, and obviously draft stock in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we can have elections where things are tied. Why can't we have a tie in the Heisman vote this year? I mean, it's
fair.
Incredible just how lucky we've been to see players like Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter in the same season doing what they do. I do wonder how Heisman voters, including myself, if we had our minds changed just based off watching that game last night. You can be sure Colorado was nervous because as Ashton Jeanty was going off, breaking off long runs, they were sharing videos on social media of, hey, we're just posting this for no reason, of Travis Hunter. So listen, I think that this vote is going to be closer than a lot of people are thinking right now.
Really?
Not necessarily because of that one game, but I do wonder if there's some of the politics involved in there with people not liking Dion, and some of these voters who are older and used to the older school coaches and all this might just vote in favor of Ashton Jeanty in spite of Travis Hunter. Having said that, Travis Hunter should still win this thing, but I think the vote is going to be a lot higher than a lot of us are expecting.
So your vote is for?
I cannot reveal that as a Heisman voter.
Oh, you can't.
Until my ballot is submitted.
I get it. No, that's fine. And obviously, there's a lot of people talking about the fact that Hunter has been such a tremendous player, even though he's not playing in a conference title game. And what he's been able to do as a two-way star has been something that's very, very special, not to take away. And I guess we're lucky as football fans to be in a season where we get to see 2 really special players compete all season
I mean,
long.
I know it's easy to say any other year this player would win it, that player would win it, but I mean, you put Ashton Jeanty down anywhere, I think in the previous few years, he probably ends up winning this thing. It's always become, we always been saying it's been a quarterback award, and then we've had receivers winning it. Now we're maybe going to see Travis Hunter win it as both a receiver and a cornerback. Things are changing when we judge who's the best player in college football. We are in love these big stories where someone does something different these days, and we're seeing that now more and more in college football at these skill positions at receiver, now cornerback. But Ashton Jeanty, he is like that old road grader that we're so accustomed to seeing in the past that we would easily vote for, but I think we're still in love in this new era with the flash and the new things, something we haven't quite seen before.
Well, we'll talk to Danny Cannell. He thinks it's an anti-quarterback award now. That's what he thinks. The latest conspiracy theories, by the way, for him, yeah. A lot of the bigger conference title games are taking place at neutral sites, but a couple of these sites are not so neutral to some of the teams involved. Are they, Brandon? I mean, we're talking about Georgia playing in Atlanta, Clemson playing in Charlotte, North Carolina. When you think about home field advantage in a conference title game, I mean, how does this play out for you?
Yeah, this is huge to me, and we're going to talk a lot in the next week or two about home field advantage in the playoffs, and that's why this team is going to be so favored and everything. But I think we're going to get a sneak peek of that this weekend. In fact, we got a little bit of sneak peek of it last night in the smaller conference championship games. Those home teams, actually hosting games there on their site and campus, were 3-0. They all won by double digits by an average of 25 freaking points. And then today, you got SMU going to Charlotte. Clemson fans are going to just absolutely flood that place. SMU fans don't travel very well. I love you, SMU fans, but you just don't. That place is going to be pretty much crawling as a Clemson home game. Then you look at the SEC championship game. Georgia, which has already beaten down Texas on the road, gets Texas to come to Atlanta. Also consider this. I know Texas fans do travel very well, but Georgia has a head start in buying tickets. They knew they were going to the SEC championship game before Texas did because Texas had to win their regular season finale against A&M. So I think that's going to favor Georgia as well going into this. And then, of course, you've got a smaller conference game in Marshall and Louisiana. Marshall having to go to Louisiana. I think it's very possible we just see, we home chalk here in Conference Championship weekend, and it gives us a little bit of a preview of what to expect. I mean, we've all talked about how special these home playoff atmospheres are going to be. It's going to be such an advantage, and that's why seeding is so important and how that can be affected this week in these conference championship
so let's
games.
talk about that. How do you think that seeding could be affected, and how important it's going to be? You heard Josh talked about it, how things could change in terms of the seeding. You mentioned Boise State maybe could bump up to a 3 seed depending on what happens, throughout the day today. But let's talk about the importance of this. What do you see as an outcome with some of these seeding potential outcomes?
One thing that interests me is, can we possibly see Penn State rise all the way to #1 if they beat Oregon today?
They can't, can they? No.
I think it's possible. If Georgia beats Texas, are you really going to put a multi-loss or two-loss Georgia team ahead of a Penn State team that just had their best season in 30 years with a conference title and just one loss, and you just beat the only undefeated team remaining in college football? And Penn State, a team we, as said, just backed their way into the Big Ten championship. We could be potentially talking about the merits of making Penn State the #1 seed in the playoff.
I had to check my eyes for a second. I thought Chip Patterson was here talking about chaos scenarios, because that's pretty much what you're talking about there in terms of that. Definitely a chaos scenario if you have Penn State getting to the #1 seed. All right. Thanks, Brandon Marcello. The Big Ten Championship is coming up tonight in Indy on CBS, and our crew is there getting ready for it. We're going to check in with them next. Welcome back to the College Football Pregame Show here on CBS Sports HQ, presented by Hellman's, America's #1 mayonnaise. Jeremy St. Louis alongside Brandon Marcello. Happy to have you along, and we're also happy to have part of the cast in Indianapolis. They've rolled out of bed. They're ready to join us after a night of fun and frivolity in Indiana. Danny Cannell was complaining during the break about how tired he is because they're having so much fun out there. They're here to chat college football storylines. And Chip, I want to come to you first here because Brandon put out a chaos scenario as before we went to break that Penn State could become the #1 seed if they beat Oregon and Georgia beats Texas in the SEC. How do you feel about that chaos scenario? Do you guys agree?
Well, good morning, Jeremy. Good morning, Brandon. And Danny, I would say that I don't know if it's chaotic. I think that would be, with a win against Oregon, that would be a 1 seed earned because you have one of the best wins in the entire country.
That is what the committee has shown value. I mean, we've had a lot of conversation about Alabama. They've ignored their 2 bad losses because they beat Georgia, right? They do value those big wins. I don't think it would be that big of a shot, but I think the one thing that we always overlook in these conversations, what is the result? Like if Georgia waxes Texas, they'll probably leapfrog. They could become the #1 seed, right? If Oregon, if Penn State waxes Oregon,
well, then
that makes it a very clear-cut answer right there. So I do think the result of the game itself matters.
Yeah, it has to feel like for a Penn State program that has constantly been having to, feel like they were just so close. If all of a sudden they woke up on Sunday and they are the 1 seed, maybe it's something mystical and magical. But anyway, we will talk much more about that game here in just a little bit, including our matchup to watch. But let's go big picture here, especially when it comes to the coaching carousel, because things are heating up at North Carolina. We know that they are trying to move quickly. We know that they have identified some candidates who are in competition this championship weekend, but we also know there has been contact with Bill Belichick. Couple interviews, some discussion, some reports about what might go into that kind of tenure. What do you make of all the buzz around Bill B and UNC?
I am here for it. I'll tell you that because it's great content for us on the Cover 3 podcast. And you put out something. We were talking last night at dinner about the fact that Bill Belichick. I always thought that he would automatically bring Steve Belichick, his son, who's at Washington as the defensive coordinator currently, with him. Like maybe that input he's been getting as Steve Belichick has been in college football for a year now. Maybe that excites him. But bringing him there to Chapel Hill, working with his son again, I think that could be attractive. But here's where I think you and I disagree. Ooh. I would love to see it. I think it'd be a great hire for UNC, making them even more relevant, bringing back a big name into one, 6-time Super Bowl winning coach. I know it's hard to envision Bill Belichick going and sitting in living rooms of 16, 17-year-olds trying to sell them on North Carolina. But in today's transactional landscape, where it is about the money, all you have to do is show them those 6 Super Bowl rings and tell them the number of what they would be paid, and that's all you have to do. So I think it would be a great hire for North Carolina.
It would be a splashy hire.
Yes,
it would 100% put him on the map. But the thing that stands out to me is you do have other candidates that are younger. You do have other candidates that have been identified as potential rising stars in the industry. And so often you see the zig then zag. If you're going to have the 70-something-year-old coach, how do you go to another 70-something-year-old coach, especially when you've got younger coaches that are in the mix right there? But Bill Belichick, with the limited college coaching experience, my #1 question would be, if you were going to sell me on this, you've got to sell me on him being able to change the DNA of North Carolina football, because this is, even as Mac Brown was able to raise that floor, bring it back to the historical average of being bowl eligible, they still fell short, and they fell short later in seasons. They fell short on defense. They fell short with blown leads, like losing as a double-digit favorite. If you're going to sell me on Bill Belichick, you got to tell me that he's going to change the mentality of North Carolina football.
I think he would bring something they have lacked, maybe historically, forever. It's a toughness. I mean, when we played in Florida State, we played North Carolina, they had dudes that were impressive, that looked good coming off the bus. They were phenomenal. Once you hit them in the mouth, it wasn't exactly the response that you would expect. I guarantee you Bill Belichick would bring a toughness to Chapel Hill that they maybe have never seen before.
One more coach that has the NFL's attention rather than NFL to college is Notre Dame's Marcus Freeman. And he has done really great work with this team to be able to bounce back from that Northern Northern Illinois loss, and to be instilling an edge, a relentlessness with the way the Fighting Irish play, double-digit win after double-digit win. What do you make of his future with Notre Dame and what he's done this year with the team?
If I'm a Notre Dame fan, I am nervous. And I actually felt this, the introductory press conference for Marcus Freeman when he was introduced for Notre Dame, I thought, wow, that sounds like an NFL head coach.
Ooh.
I do think he's got the chops. I do think he would be a great option for a lot of NFL teams. They are constantly looking for black head coaches. I think that makes him attractive and maybe potentially at the top of anybody's list of first person to call. What I don't know is that what Marcus Freeman desires, right? Because that's what we never truly know. Some people get into coaching and their ultimate goal is to win a college football national championship. Maybe it's even to be the head coach of Notre Dame. Some coaches, their ultimate goal is to get a Super Bowl title and win in the NFL. I don't know what Marcus Freeman values, what his personal goals are, but if an NFL team comes calling, I would be nervous if I was Notre Dame.
If I was to make a list of 5 head coaches who have changed the way we talk about their tenure, I think Marcus Freeman in this season maybe has done it, as much as many, because coming into this year, there was some doubt. You were feeling as though, all right, so you took over after Brian Kelly left. You were the players' favorite, and we still saw some head-scratching losses along the way during his time as a head coach. I think there is an immense opportunity. Notre Dame's going to host a playoff game in South Bend. Like, all the dreams of winter weather playoff are going to be there. If he can capitalize on this, if he does want to go to the NFL, I would argue there may not be a better opportunity where his stock price is higher.
Totally agree. And either way, he's going to get a massive payday because it's probably going to come from Notre Dame, who does not want to lose another coach. But when you lost Brian Kelly, that was a tough blow, right? He was a consistently good coach, and he said some things on the way out that made it feel like he was going to a bigger, better opportunity. This is Notre Dame we're talking about. They do not want to feel slighted and feel like a coach is leaving again for a bigger, better opportunity. The NFL is a hard sell because it is bigger and better, but I think they would do everything in their power to keep him.
All right, let's go to a coaching matchup down in Atlanta. So we not only have a rematch of Georgia and Texas, we have another showdown between two coaches that know each other's tendencies. They know exactly how they want to play everything. How do you think that Georgia's Kirby Smart against Texas's Steve Sarkisian, what are going to be the keys to that, pass the chalk coaching matchup between a former Alabama OC and a former Alabama DC as they play for the SEC championship?
This is one of my favorite dynamics of this game, the offensive mastermind versus the defensive mastermind. And the first time around, the offensive mastermind got embarrassed, Steve Sarkisian. So to me, that's going to be what I'm looking for. Does Texas make the adjustments to do a better job protecting? Because it's not all about the offensive line, and we'll see what happens with Kelvin Banks, their tackle, who has been questionable to play in this game. If he's out, we'll make that more challenging. But what do they do on blitz pickups? Georgia's great at bringing pressures, confusing offensive linemen and running backs, who will be picking up guys in protection. That, to me, is I want to see what he does to protect Quinn Ewers. And I've said this a couple times on the Cover 3 podcast. I'm curious to see what the game plan is for Arch Manning. I think it'll be a little bit bigger than it's been because we just saw Haynes King for Georgia Tech running all over Georgia's defense. Quinn Ewers is not the same athlete that Arch Manning is, so I think we'll see more of Arch Manning with his legs sprinkled in there. But you can't let them know, oh, he's just coming in to run the football, or else they'll eat him alive. So guess what that provides the opportunity for? An Arch Manning pass. Could you imagine if Arch Manning throws just for maybe 2 of 3, but they could be 2 of 2 completions that could be for big plays if you catch Georgia sleeping?
Well, Arch Manning is a 5-star quarterback. I know that he's being used to run the football a lot, but he is not incapable of throwing the football. This isn't a wing T quarterback.
Right.
There are so many different ways that Steve Sarkisian can use Arch Manning in this spot. I go back to a couple things. Number one, if you look at the explosive plays in that first matchup, 7 explosive plays for Georgia, 7 explosive plays for Texas. The X factor there was the turnovers, and that's where Jalen Walker, that's where the ball security. It's just going to be so huge because when Texas went into that locker room down 23-0, their offense hadn't been able to do anything. They kept tripping over their own feet. They showed incredible resilience to be able to bounce back and fight their way into that game. And if not for Carson Beck, credit to him converting a huge 3rd down, you could kind of feel the game was maybe swinging back in the Longhorns' favor. I think that if you're Steve Sarkisian, you got a phrase we use on the Cover 3 podcast a lot, you got game scripted out of what you wanted to do. Fresh start, in Atlanta, and those Georgia fans, we know a couple, they've got kind of a cagey feeling about what happens in Atlanta. So I think that's going to be really important to make sure that those turnovers don't start flipping the other way, because then it'll make Texas have a lot of confidence in the revenge angle.
Absolutely. And I do think Carson Beck, I mean, it's the player to watch for Georgia, because he did have those 3 interceptions. As bad as he played, they were still able to win. And remember, after the game, Kirby Smart post-game was like, I loved the resilience I saw to my quarterback. He was still able to lead us to victory. But since the game against Georgia, where he had his third 3-interception game of the season, he's had 11 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He's playing as great as he can. I think that's the player to watch. If he plays like he's been capable and he's been doing these last 3 games, they'll win. If he struggles, they'll lose.
And then the game of the day, right here in Lucas Oil Stadium. It is the #1 team in the country, the only team with the 0 in the loss column, the Oregon Ducks, trying to get the job done as they take on Penn State. Now, we discussed just a little bit ago what an opportunity this is for a Nittany Lions program that had felt like they had fallen like just 1 game short. So let's talk about X factors. Who do you think is going to end up making the difference in this matchup?
I think there's a guy on Penn State that could be a good X factor in Harrison Wallace, the receiver. But let's be honest, the major X factor
44
is the guy, Tyler Warren, who's going to win the Mackey Award as the best tight end in the country. And what's interesting is that he's not even a traditional tight end. Like the way that Andy Kolnicki uses him, playing at 6 different receivers, 6 different positions across the board. He's taken 26 snaps at quarterback this season. Like, that's the type of thing. He snapped the ball under center and then gone out for a pass. That's what I can't wait, because we know that Oregon has seen all those plays. I mean, look at all these different positions they've lose them at. Traditional tight end, slot receiver, the wide receiver spot, in the backfield as a running back, and then as a quarterback, as I just mentioned. I'm curious, because we know Dan Lanning and Oregon have prepped for all of these. What else can you do? You know, like, I mean, seriously, what else can you do? But I do think they'll have some tricks up their sleeve to get this incredibly explosive player some options to get some big plays.
You and I have discussed this game, no joke, for like 24 hours this week across because of course, multi-platform excellence on the Cover 3 podcast. But I'm looking at the guy who's going to be marking Tyler Warren. Oregon linebacker Mateo Uiagalelei is such a dynamic player who is going to be tasked, because of his athleticism, of trying to keep up with Tyler Warren, of trying to make sure that when he is trying to get those space on the field, that you're going to be able to check him. And also, Mateo Uiagalelei is one of Oregon's best players in terms of tackles for loss, in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback. And so much of what we look at in terms of Penn State is, if you're going to rely on the tight end, if you're going to rely on your running game, and if you're worried at all about the downfield passing attack, speed up Drew Aller with some pressure. You know, Mateo was amazing in that Ohio State game, so I'm fired up about that as well. All right, Jeremy, we still got a little bit of time to kick off, but the buzz, it's already palpable. Back to y'all in Fort Lauderdale.
Thank you very much, Chip. Thanks, Danny. Thanks for rolling out of bed and hopping on with us. And of course, we'll be back to Indy later, because the rest of our crew is showing up there. But in the meantime, hey, you know what? If you want to listen to the previews for the big games today, including our game, the Big Ten title game, download and follow the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get your podcast audio, or scan that QR code and get that latest episode right now. Welcome back to College Football Pregame, presented by Hellmann's, America's #1 mayonnaise. Some injuries that we are monitoring as we head into Championship Saturday. Big injury update coming out of the SEC. Texas left tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. will reportedly be a game-time decision in their game against Georgia because of an ankle injury. As for Georgia, they are listing running back Trevor Etienne as questionable. He's missed the Bulldogs' past 3 games with a rib injury. All right, that's going to do it for this hour of College Football Pregame here on HQ. But here's what we have coming up next hour. Josh Pate live from the Big 12 Championship in Arlington, Texas. And I've been joking about our crew in Indianapolis, how much fun they're having. They've also been doing a lot of work, big-time work. We're going to check in with them as we get set for the Big Ten title game tonight. We can't forget picks either with Mackenzie Brooks. And we've got John Talty, who's going to talk about Texas, Georgia with us, and the role that Arch Manning might play in the SEC title game against Georgia. Hour 2 of College Football Pregame next. Welcome into Hour 2 of College Football Pregame, presented by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Make every moment more. And it all comes down to this. #1 Oregon facing off against #3 Penn State for the Big Ten title. The Ducks, the only perfect team left in college football, and James Franklin and Penn State trying to change that tonight on CBS and Paramount Plus with a preview. Here's our Hakeem Dervish.
Chaos is a weekly theme in college football. One constant, Oregon, undeterred and undefeated. In their first season in the Big Ten, the Ducks ran the table. beating the best the conference had to offer. Oregon is the only undefeated team in FBS this season, a perfect 12-0. OH? Oh no. Ohio State was primed to play Oregon in the Big Ten Championship, but the Buckeyes got upset by Michigan. The beneficiary? Penn State. The Nittany Lions belong on the big stage, yet the question remains, can they win the big game? Under head coach James Franklin, Penn State has lost 11 straight games against top 5 opponents, now facing the tippy top team in all of college football. Penn State, Oregon for the Big Ten Championship on CBS.
Oregon looking to be one of 4 teams that could win a conference championship Saturday as debutantes in a new conference. Welcome back inside our HQ studios. Jeremy St. Louis alongside Brandon Marcello. And as we gear up for that title game, we have our college football pregame crew in Indy for the matchup tonight. Jordan Giorgio alongside her crew. Jordan, I know it's colder there than what you're used to. You and the crew, are you surviving? And did you bring enough warm clothes with you?
Barely surviving. We haven't gotten into any trouble thus far, but we'd be lying if we told you that we haven't had any fun in Indy. I think Cardell's on his 3rd cup of tea, so bear with us.
Go and say something to the people, Cardell.
Yeah, it's only 11 a.m.
Good morning.
Yeah. So we're going to try and get through this because we have quite a day ahead of us. All right, you guys, let's get into this matchup. You know, we've talked a lot about a win or loss for both of these teams, what it means for the college football playoff. For both squads on that field today, they're in regardless of a win or loss. From the player's perspective, though, Danny, does that alleviate some of the pressure knowing you're still in? Does it take some of the pressure off knowing you have that safety net?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I think there's probably more of a free-flowing feeling from Penn State, right? They didn't even think they were playing in this game. They were thinking, hey, we're going to probably be the 5 seed. Their season felt a little bit underwhelming because their biggest game, they lose to Ohio State, and they go back to James Franklin getting yelled at by a fan as he's coming off the field. And now I can envision them, watching and feeling and getting the score of the Michigan-Ohio State game and realizing, oh my gosh, we have a chance to win a Big Ten championship now, something we did not think we were going to get. So I think they absolutely have a little bit more of a freedom that they're playing with house money, where Oregon's still trying to cling on to that #1 spot, being undefeated, being clean this season, which they have been spectacular. But I think there's a little bit more pressure on Oregon to win this game.
I would agree. I think that what helps Penn State is the fact that when we look at these matchups and we talk about James Franklin not being able to win these big games, it looks like he's coaching very stressed. It looks like the players are playing with a very tense way about them. And I think that, like Danny said, they're playing with house money today. So James Franklin can go out, he can coach free. He can tell his players to go out and be free. He can tell Drew Aller, take some risk. You know, if you see a shot down the field, take it. Nick Singleton, if you see a lane open up, take it. Try to make something happen. Try to create and make things happen, because when you're in situations like this, you can play free and you can just play, your type of game without the pressure of, the circumstances.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you say that, because I was going to ask you if both coaches are going to play a little bit more conservatively, knowing that there's more games to play. What's your take there?
No, I think you still want that #1 seed because you get that bye. And sorry,
we're gonna get through this. It's fine.
You get that #1 seed because you get that bye, and that's going to help you a lot.
Right.
Oregon has the opportunity to be one of 6 teams to beat Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan all in the same year, on top of making a splash in the first-year conference in the Big Ten and being Big Ten champs.
Danny, this points total set at 50.5. Do you think it's going to be a pretty low-scoring game if both coaches are maybe playing a little bit more conservatively?
I do. I don't know if it's about the conservative nature of the coaching. I think it has to do about these defenses that are outstanding. I mean, we've got Abdul Carter, one of the best pass rushers in the country, who I think is going to get after Dylan Gabriel today. And then on the other side, Oregon just got back Jordan Birch. Mateo Uyunglele has really developed. He was the guy that kind of surprised a lot of people in that game against Ohio State. And go back and I watched the film against Washington. I thought it was, I kept watching them, started counting. I'm like, they had 10 sacks and 16 tackles for loss in that game. Like, it was not a month. It was one game. So I think they're going to be able to get after this Penn State offense as well, if they can contain Tyler Warren, that superstar, X factor at tight end for the Penn State Nittany Lions, which I think they'll have a pretty good plan. Dan Lanning's a great defensive mind. Tom Allen, the defensive coordinator for Penn State. I think the defenses will shine, but if you looked at my record all season long, maybe it's going to be like 50-49. Like, it could be that.
All right, let's go ahead.
I was going to say, to add to Danny's point, both of these teams also need to rely on the run game.
Yeah.
Jordan James has been phenomenal for Oregon. He's got almost 1,200 yards rushing. He's got 13 touchdowns. And then on the other side of the ball, Penn State needs to find a way to get Nick Singleton and Katron Allen going, whether it's in the run game, whether it's in the pass game. Like, both of these teams are going to have to live through their running backs today. And I think that controlling the clock, especially if you're Penn State and trying to keep the ball away from Oregon, trying to keep the ball away from Dylan Gabriel, you have to be able to run the ball. You have to be able to establish a dominance at the line of scrimmage and keep the ball out of the Ducks' hands.
I do want to talk about some of the weapons a little bit later on, but let's talk about this quarterback matchup. We're going to see two of the most efficient quarterbacks in the conference today, Oregon's Dylan Gabriel and Penn State's Drew Aller. Let's start with Gabriel here. Danny, aside from he's a veteran, the most experience in the game, where else does he have the edge?
Decision making. I mean, he's been the most trustworthy quarterback all season long. We've seen guys up and down. Carson Beck's a good example at Georgia. He's had phenomenal games, and then he's had three interception games. Jalen Milroe has been incredible at times, taking over games with his legs, but if you take those away, he gets held to 3 points against Oklahoma. Dylan Gabriel has just consistently delivered. The other thing, Jordan, that I've been impressed with him, he's gotten better throughout the season. And I think oftentimes we think for a transfer quarterback, oh, you just plug him in, just plop him in there in Eugene, and it'll just work. He struggled somewhat earlier, had a couple red zone interceptions. To me, that was more about him getting used to the timing and rhythm of Will Stein's system, getting used to his wide receiving core, and he's got better and better all season long. But he is a great decision maker. I will point out this. He's also a pretty deceptive athlete. Last year in the Red River rivalry, he rushed for over 100 yards. If Penn State gets after him, he does have the capability to get outside the pocket and hurt you with his legs.
Let's get to Drew Aller now, Cardell. This junior year, we've really seen him come into his own. We've seen improved accuracy, efficiency as well. Maybe not the eye-popping numbers, but I think that's due to the fact that James Franklin and company maybe not putting him in the situations, allowing him to go outside his comfort zone so much. But I think the overarching discussion with Penn State and a lot of people not believing that they can come out on top with a win today is that we know he's capable of having those high explosive plays, but we haven't seen it yet. How confident are you that we see that from him today?
You know what? I think my comfort level is very high with Drew Aller in this offense because they do a good job of getting the ball out of his hands. You look at the efficiency, you look at the pass percentage over 70% because a lot of dink and dunks. It is going to be a nightmare for this Oregon defense who just came up with 10 sacks and all these quarterback hits a few weeks back versus Washington because it's going to be hard to get to him how fast he get the ball out of his hands to guys like Tyler Warren and checking it down to those backs, Singleton and Allen. So he has the opportunity today to continue to play within his system because as we saw a few weeks back, this Oregon defense can really get after the quarterback.
You mentioned one of his weapons in the run game. That's Nick Singleton, of course. I think earlier in the season, we saw him with those nagging injuries, and over the past few weeks, he's really playing some of his best football. How big will it be for Penn State to get him involved not only in the run game but the passing game as well?
Enormous, because when you look at his stats, Nick Singleton is averaging close to 5 yards a carry. He's averaging 8.8 yards per reception. So that just shows how he can play in different roles. He can be used in the run game and the pass game. And outside of Tyler Warren, we have not seen anybody step up for this Penn State offense. Drew Aller has been a product of that, but I think that's because his weapons have kind of let him down throughout the course of the season. So obviously I'm a running back, so I would love to see these backs take over the game and really just put on a very strong performance to kind of rewrite some of the narratives. Some of the narratives of, well, Nick Singleton hasn't played that well. Penn State can't really run the ball that well. Well, you've got an opportunity in a conference championship against the #1 team in the country who's got one of the best defenses in all of college football to really cement yourself as a group and as backs to go out and just take over this game and try to leave a positive impact. That way it's not so one-dimensional. That way the Oregon defense can't just scout around and double-team Tyler Warren and then you have no other option. So it's going to be paramount for these guys to get going.
Are you still giving the edge to Jordan James?
I mean, you have to, because when you look at the production, he's got double what Nick Singleton has in rushing yards. He's got double what he has in touchdowns. And I know 2 is better than 1, but when you've got one guy that gets that much production, it's hard to go against those results. And when I look at these two offenses, I see Jordan James helping out his quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, a lot more. I see him affecting the offense, opening up passing lanes for the receivers, making the pass game open up. I'm not seeing that from Nick Singleton. Yes, he's running the ball ball a little bit better recently, and he does, make some hay in the passing game, but he's not just completely turning the offense upside down and making people respect him as a number one threat for the offense.
Great way to put it. We'll see if he proves us wrong a little bit later on when kicks off here from Lucas Oil Stadium. Let's get a game pick here, you guys. Cardell, I'll start with you. Who you got in this one?
I got Penn State. I think the defense, that front seven with Carter, is going to be a little bit too much for Dylan Gabriel and Oregon offense.
I'm going to go Penn State. I love them with the points. Here's the thing that concerns me a little bit. I also like the under. I told you lower scoring game, under 50.5. Drew Aller in the biggest games has kind of shrunk on the big stage. Even last year I was in Columbus where he didn't play great against the Buckeyes. This year, earlier season against Illinois, a win. He didn't do anything spectacular against Ohio State. Again, this year in the loss, didn't look spectacular. He's got to change that narrative. I think he can, but he's got to do it. If he does, they'll win the game outright. If he doesn't, I just think the defense can keep it within a field goal.
I'm gonna be the one. I gotta go Oregon cover today because I'm gonna trust the team that has the better head coach, in my opinion, the quarterback that I trust the most, and since we just talked about the running backs, the team that has a better running game. And when I look at it, that's Oregon, so I'll take them to cover today.
All right, fun is just getting started. A countdown to kickoff continues from here, Lucas Oil Stadium. Jeremy, we'll send it back to you in studio.
Thanks very much, Jordan. Good to see everybody. Cardale, keep drinking that tea. As Jordan mentioned, it is a long day ahead for you guys. And of course, the Big Ten Championship coming up tonight on CBS and Paramount Plus. Number 3 Penn State versus number 1 Oregon, the only unblemished team left in college football. They'll look to go to 13-0 for the first time in program history. Kickoff set for tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. All right, coming up, Georgia and Texas meet for the second time this season with the Bulldogs looking to hand the Longhorns their second loss of the season. Carson Beck not good in that first game. Which Beck do they need to win in the SEC title game? John Talty will tell us. And Dabo Swinney somehow found his way into the ACC title game, but can he come up with a game plan good enough to beat Rhett Lashley and his SMU Mustangs? Austin Hannon will check in from Charlotte next. Hour 2 of your college football pregame show presented by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Make every moment more. Penn State and Oregon set to face off in the Big Ten Championship tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS and Paramount+. It's the first time two AP top 3 teams have met in a conference title game since Alabama and Georgia did it back in 2012. And these two teams, worth the hype, a combined 23-1 this season. The only loss suffered by Penn State, the hands of Ohio State. Oregon looking to run the table and get to 13-0 for the first time in program history. The last time the Ducks got to 12-0, they lost back in 2010, the BCS title game to Auburn. This is the 4th time two AP top 3 teams have clashed in this game. Each of the previous 3 games were all from the SEC and all involved Alabama, 2 of them involving Florida, and all those games have come this century. Well, most of them have come this century, or last century, pardon me, as we look at Penn State's all-time wins. We know how James Franklin has struggled against the top 10 teams in the Big Ten in college football, but it's not just him. This is the Nittany Lions in terms of AP #1 team since 1981, and you look at it, they have 5 straight losses. You can bet James Franklin wants nothing more than to quell the chatter. He spoke to our Josh Pate this week.
You're not in a conference championship game unless you've earned the right to be there, unless what you are is good enough. But then when you get on that stage, if folks aren't careful, individually or collectively, sometimes they think more than their best is required.
Correct.
Is that a message that you have to hammer home repeatedly, especially for a building full of guys that in many cases have not been on a stage this big?
Yeah, well, I think that's what they're all looking for, right? Do the coaches believe? Because if you say the same message all year long and then you get into certain games and the message changes, they feel that. They sense that. And for us, I said to them on Sunday that this needs to be the best week of preparation that we've had all year long. I said the same thing last week. And if you just focus on getting better and your process and respecting the opponent, but ultimately it's about us, then those other things will take care of themselves.
And you'll be able to see that full conversation tonight on CBS as part of our pregame show. Welcome inside our HQ studios. Jeremy St. Louis, Brandon Marcello, and Josh Pate is joining us here after his chat with James Franklin. We want to talk about that with him. Josh, we've all dissected how James Franklin can't win against the big boys. What would it mean to take down #1 Oregon and win the Big Ten?
It'd be a game changer. I think it'd be a much bigger deal, candidly, Jeremy, than even if Oregon won it. Because Oregon is the one who is recruited right on par with your Ohio States, your Georgias, your Alabamas. Penn State hasn't done that. There's been a very clear differentiator in tier between talent acquisition, the way they do it and the way the big boys do it. If they were able to do this tonight, I know technically the stat would remain that he hasn't gotten it done against Ohio State, Michigan. This Oregon team is as much, if not more, a caliber of that team than even those two have been this year. We already saw Oregon play Ohio State and they won. I think it would be the biggest win James Franklin has had in his tenure at Penn State if he were to win this game today, because he won the Big Ten championship, what, 8 or 9 years ago? It feels like a century ago. The sport has changed so radically. The Big Ten has changed radically. You got a divisionless Big Ten now, but yet you've still got the same talking points around Penn State. Today, winning would do a lot to quell that.
Josh, Arizona State picked last in the Big 12 preseason poll. The media never knows what the heck we're talking about. Why this turnaround? Why now? How is Kenny Dillingham doing this in his 2nd year?
Yeah, but Brandon, there they are. They're right here. So, yeah, I can confirm they showed up. I think, #1, as you well know, the Big 10 is, or the Big 12 is so compacted in terms of competitive balance top to bottom. We see #1 versus #16 in their neutral field. The spread's like 7 or whatnot any given week. I think what happened was in the spring, you saw Jaden Rashada enter the transfer portal. And that freaked a lot of people out because that was projected to be Arizona State's starting quarterback. Well, as everyone nationally and regionally freaked out, Kenny Dillingham just kind of said, we'll be all right. And the reason he said we'll be all right is because he knew what the rest of the country was going to come to know, and that was Rashada probably wasn't in line to be their starting quarterback. A kid by the name of Sam Levitt, who's warming up right behind us, was. He also knew Cam Scadaboo is a guy who has all-American potential at the tailback position, but also I think there's been a feeling in this building for a long time that I think the rest of the country is just now getting wind of, and that is when we say culture, everybody says it. But when we say culture, really what I'm looking for when I say that is, does the head coach have the right juice? That's number one. Number two, does the entire building reflect that? When I watch you play, when I watch the way you go about your business, is it like the thumbprint of the head coach? You know Kenny Dillingham well. I know him well. This place is absolutely Kenny Dillingham. This team's absolutely Kenny Dillingham. For that matter, Iowa State is Matt Campbell. I don't think it's any accident that those are the two teams we'll see here today in Dallas.
There are some adjustments that Kenny Dillingham is going to have to make, though, because of the fact they're without leading receiver Jordan Tyson. He suffered an undisclosed injury and is out for the season. He underwent surgery on Tuesday. So, Josh, how does that affect this offense? And who needs to kind of step up to maybe make up some of that gap that he's going to leave in terms of their production?
Red zone defense for Arizona State is what will have to step up. I still think the red zone is what will decide this. Arizona State's an interesting team because even with wide receiver one, they've gotten to the red zone, haven't converted touchdowns. They're in the one teens in that category all year, which just goes to show you they've threaded the needle in other compartments to be able to make it here. In the aggregate, Jeremy, if you were to tell me they score 7s instead of 3s whenever they get in the red zone today, that would be part one of the formula. Part two of the formula is when Iowa State gets down there, you got to hold them to 3s instead of 7s. It's one of the most fundamental, basic, elementary game plans or way to look at a football game. But I just talked to Taylor Mauser, who's the offensive coordinator here now. Talked to him walking up the tunnel. That's what he echoed for Iowa State. I will guarantee you that's what's being preached in both the team meeting rooms for Arizona State. What happens when the ball gets inside the 20 for both teams today will probably decide this.
Josh, I'll tell you what, Big 12 has been so fantastic to watch, the chaos, but it's hurt their standing in the playoff committee's eyes. They're probably not going to get a first-round bye. But I'll ask you this. Texas obviously just left that conference. If they were still in it, could either of these teams today, Iowa State or Arizona State, beat them, and why?
I guess they could. They would be overwhelming underdogs sentimentally to do that. I would not pick them to do that. I think the SEC's brought out the best in Texas, though. Now, when I say that, it sounds like it's a talking point from a memo handed down by Greg Sankey. I don't mean it like the old, it just means more. What I do mean, though, is when you've listened to them talk for the past 3 years, even when they were in the Big 12, they've been talking about building along the lines of scrimmage, building a talent roster to go compete in the SEC. And technically, you could say, oh, that should have been your ethos no matter what conference you played in. Yeah, that's great. That sounds good on paper. In reality, they've been building knowing this date was coming. Now, they're going to play later today in Atlanta for an SEC championship, so they accomplished that. But if we would have pulled the rug out from under them 11th hour and they just stayed in the Big 12 with this team, my inclination is they would have handled the Big 12 rather pretty thoroughly this year. Having said that, they had that shot. Oklahoma, for that matter, had that shot for a while, and they didn't exactly, dominate the conference. It wasn't always them. In fact, it seldom was them in this game. So I think it's a testament to the Big 12. I'd love to see it in an A-B scenario, alternate universe. I'd love to see it. But as it stands right now, there's a lot of oxygen in the Big 12 room. Brett Yormark, the commissioner, was just talking over here a little while ago, and that was the question. You don't have a Texas or an Oklahoma anymore. So who's going to take over? Who's going to be that 1, 2, 3, 4 program in the conference? Well, it's up for grabs. That's the beauty of today in a game like this.
And we know that these two teams fairly evenly matched, because at least that's what Vegas thinks, because it's essentially a pick 'em. The line is 1.5 and the total's just shy of 50. So, Josh, when you're looking at things, you've been following this all season long. Give us a pick for the game today.
I ended up leaning slightly Iowa State. I do think the wide receiver injury is pretty critical, because as much as you rewind 3 minutes ago, I said if Arizona State can convert touchdowns in the red zone, they'll win. How many times do they get there is my follow-up concern. I also think if you look at the defensive looks that Rocco Becht and Iowa State have been presented with the last few weeks, comparably, today's will be a little bit easier task in knowing what you've got, in knowing what you're seeing it the right way. At that point, you have to execute. And I trust Iowa State's personnel to execute a little bit more. So slightly in Iowa State. Take the points. I think they win outright.
All right, Josh Pate joining us from Arlington, Texas, where he's set to watch the Big 12 title game, which kicks off at noon Eastern time. Great to see you, Josh. Enjoy the game this afternoon, and you heard him. He's leaning just a little bit towards Iowa State. What do you think? You think you lean in that same way?
I'm starting to lean that way because of the injury to the top ranked receiver.
Tyson, yeah.
If he was out there, I'd get Arizona State easy.
All right, well, Josh Pate, you can get more from him on Josh Pate's College Football Show Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can bet on Sunday he's going to be talking about his experience at the Big 12 title game today. It's live at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. You can also follow Josh on his socials. Atlanta, Georgia, home to the SEC title game, and for these Georgia Bulldogs, it'll feel like home as they face Texas for another championship. Of all the P4 conference title games, this is the only one with a matchup between two teams that have faced each other this century. And what a matchup it is set to be as the Bulldogs and Longhorns meet for a second time this season. Georgia handed Texas their only loss of the season back in Week 8, but it was an ugly game for Bulldogs quarterback Carson Beck, who didn't throw a touchdown, but did throw 3 interceptions. And it has been a roller coaster season for Beck in Athens this year. He's had 2 games with 5 or more touchdowns this season. Like last week against Georgia Tech in the overtime thriller, he's the first player in program history to do that, but he's also had stinkers 3 games this season with at least 3 interceptions. All right, so let's discuss what we could possibly expect from Beck and from Georgia with our John Talty, who joins us now. John, you saw the stats there, the roller coaster that Carson Beck has been this season. Against Texas, he did have his struggles in that first game, despite the fact that they got the win. What do they need from him today in order to get to a Texas team that obviously knows how to get to him?
Yeah, in the simplest way, they need the good Carson Beck to show up. I think there was really a turning point after a loss to Ole Miss in which he was harassed, banged up, was not able to do much in that loss. Since then, he's played really well. 11 touchdowns, no interceptions. We're really getting a version of him that's been effective. But it's going to be a real challenge in this game. Texas defense has been terrific. We saw that against Texas A&M, but really throughout the whole season, this is a defense that has played really well and had, forced 3 interceptions of Beck's in the first game. So that's going to be a challenge. Trevor Etienne, has been trying to get him back. He's missed the last 3 games. He's played well without Etienne, but I think they're going to need a good version of Beck with the running game not as effective as it's been in the past. So, Beck has to make smart decisions. He's got to, make the right move when he gets pressured. We've seen him make mistakes in the past. So how he handles that Texas pressure, I think, is going to be crucial in a game that's, really important for Georgia.
On the other side of this, for Texas, Quinn Ewers has dealt with injuries this season, but has remained consistently solid. In their first meeting, he did throw 2 touchdowns, had an interception. After that game, Steve Sarkisian said, look, I hope that we get another shot at Georgia, and here it is. Do you think that there's a chance that maybe Sark game plans a little Arch Manning into the offense here?
I do. We saw a little bit of it against Texas A&M. Arch had the first touchdown of that game, and Sark kind of said afterwards, some things you got to hold back, and that was a moment where they deployed it. I think, using Arch's legs and an Arch-type package makes a lot of sense in a game like this. There's been some murmurs here in Atlanta about Quinn being maybe a little bit more banged up than people know. We know that star left tackle Kelvin Banks is a game-time decision. He was listed as questionable earlier in the week. So there's some things that add up that maybe you might need some moments where you need a guy who's a little bit more athletic, a little bit faster, a little bit more willing to do things with his legs in a key spot. So I do think we're going to see some Arch in this game. Of course, you probably don't want to do everything that you have with him planned. They've still got a long season potentially to go. We know they're going to be in the playoff, potentially having a bye. There's some things that if you're Sark, you're thinking ahead potentially. I don't want to burn it all in this SEC championship game, but it is an important game for them to get that bye. And so I do think we'll see some signs of Arch Manning in this game.
It's a great matchup between the 2 head coaches, Smart versus Sark. Okay, we had National Signing Day this past Tuesday, the opening of the signing window, and it was a big day for Oregon. They flipped Ohio State 5-star Naheem Offord. You had a chance to talk to Offord about what that flip entailed. Give us that part of that conversation as why he decided to make that choice.
Yeah, he had a commitment video at the end of his ceremony, which was, a couple hours long. And he had, Dan Lanning and other people talking about, what he's going to mean to Oregon. And in the middle of the commitment video, Phil Knight popped up, the Nike co-founder, Oregon super booster. And I asked Naeem after his ceremony about it, and he said that Phil Knight played a huge role in his decision. He said he's already waiting on me to get up there. He's got some things planned for me. He's going to help me get my own shoe. And that's just part of the superpower and super benefit that a school like Oregon has with a guy like Phil Knight, who's not only incredibly wealthy. I think Forbes put his net worth in the $45 billion range, but also just the Nike factor and how involved that he's been in that program. And multiple people, agents, even Mike Loxley told me that Phil Knight, he's investing a ton of money in cancer research, millions and billions of dollars. And he's investing a lot of money in trying to see a national championship. And so we'll see it on the field this Saturday with Dylan Gabriel and Evan Stewart and some of these other super transfers that Oregon's brought in. But it's also really paving the path for the recruiting efforts in the future. And this is, the current world that we live in, where a billionaire fan can have a major impact on the field and his favorite team's success.
He is 24/7 Sports reporter John Talty discussing the SEC title game and more here on your college football pregame show. Thank you very much, John. All right, let's turn things over to the ACC, where SMU and Clemson are set to meet as the Mustangs look to continue their college football ascension with a conference championship. This week, Mustangs head coach Rhett Lashley said their top 8 position in the latest playoff rankings means they should be in the college football playoff no matter what happens versus Clemson. We know the winner is definitely in, but there's uncertainty over whether the loser can make it into the 12-team field. Lashley makes a good case for a team that is on one of the longest active win streaks in the game. A win today makes it 10 in a row, alongside Notre Dame, a few games behind Oregon, who can push their streak to 14 with a win in the Big Ten title game. For Clemson, they backdoored their way into the ACC title game, and they don't want to rely on the same thing for the playoff. The Tigers looked college football playoff certainties in September and October, but a slide in November had them needing help to get to the ACC title game, and they got that help. But if they lose here, that may be it, with Miami looking perhaps like a better playoff fit or something else. As you take a look at the most conference championship game wins, Dabo Swinney's right near the top of that list. He's got 8 in a row. Let's dig into this a bit with Austin Hannon, who covers Clemson for our partners at 24/7 Sports. The great thing for Clemson, Austin, is Dabo Swinney is that they've seen this before, right? They've been to the ACC title game, 10th ACC title game appearance under Dabo. They've won 8 straight. How much do you think that experience is going to benefit Clemson in this position versus an SMU team that hasn't been here in a very long time?
Yeah, there's a people kind of sit on different sides of this fence. What does it matter, right? Because those 8 teams that we're talking about with Clemson, none of those same some of those same players from 2 years ago on this team, but for the majority, those guys, I mean, that's almost 10 years ago now when we're talking about Clemson and winning national titles and all that stuff. They have been dominant in this league, and I think that gives them a lot of confidence in this city that they've come to and won so many times. Dabo's won 8. He's actually won 8 in a row. He lost his first appearance back in 2009, which was his first time in this game. And this game hasn't been around too long. Clemson's played in the majority of them. And so there is a comfort level there. But if they don't fix the way they've been playing and, get some of these top teams they've seen this year, I mean, winning 8 games in the past doesn't really mean anything for Saturday night. So there's a lot that goes into it. But I think, like you said, I mean, SMU's, this is their first time doing this. Obviously, they made that big jump from the American. They went undefeated in the American last year, won the conference. And then take the jump to Power 4, and it's been like no problem. They went 8-0 in the conference this year. They haven't lost a conference game in 2 years now, and they're looking to finish the deal. On SMU, it really is interesting just because this is kind of 2 different, opposites. We got this matchup. Everybody thought it was going to be Miami a few weeks ago. They lose to Syracuse, and so now SMU, the first-year team, has got a chance to take out the team that's kind of owned this conference for a decade now. So can Dabo Swinney hold on? Can he win a 9th in a row here in Charlotte? Or can Rhett Lashley and SMU come in here and, kind of stake their claim to this conference in year 1?
It's set to be a good game. Austin Hannon in Charlotte, North Carolina for 24/7 Sports, and us talking Clemson and SMU as they get set to meet in the title game. Thank you very much, Austin. Let's continue the conversation with the SMU side of things here, Brandon, because I want to ask you heard what Rhett Lashley said this week about the fact that because they're in the top 8, they should automatically get a spot in the college football playoff. Do you agree with that?
I do, but they cannot lose by more than 2 touchdowns tonight, because if that ends up happening, I think that takes it completely off the table and out of their hands and to a point where they'll be left out. But if SMU makes this a close game, if they lose, they should be in. What bothers me about all this really is that the whole entire conversation all week around SMU is when they lose. Like, what if they win? Where their seeding should be then? SMU is a really darn good team. They own 8 wins by double digits this season. They've beaten everybody on their schedule practically, except for BYU earlier in this season when they were a much different team with a different quarterback, by the way, SMU, not Kevin Jennings. But SMU certainly deserves to be in. You cannot punish a team by slipping them as many as 4 spots or more in the rankings because they had to play an extra game in a championship game, which they got to by winning every single game in your conference.
Do you think that comment this week, did that perk you up in any way? Because when I heard that, I was kind of like, wait a minute, he's kind of sowing some seeds depending on what happens either way. It struck me as perhaps a little bit of nerves creeping in almost.
I think potentially, the other thing is I go back to what Rhett Lashley was saying just a couple of weeks ago about how we need to win to get in. And now things have changed, obviously, because of the chaos in front of them, to where if you lose, you could still get in. And I wonder if the committee and others hearing that earlier this season, you make them think, well, do they really deserve to be in if they don't win out? You got to be careful as a coach nowadays when you're out there politicking in the public space, what exactly you need to be saying about your team in the playoffs.
SMU chasing their 13th conference title in program history, but their first in over 4 decades. Got to go back to the early 80s to find the last one. All right, time for a break here on your college football pregame. But when we come back, it's time to put Mackenzie Brooks to work. We're going to get some parlay picks from her. This just in from the National Football League. The Philadelphia Eagles are placing tight end Dallas Goedert on injured reserve with a knee injury. That's per multiple reports. The move means that Goedert will miss the next 4 weeks, but the team is reportedly hoping he's ready to go for the start of the playoffs. Goedert ranks third on the team with 38 catches for 441 yards and 2 touchdowns. Welcome back to your college football pregame presented by FanDuel. Make every pass, run, and win. Mean more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today to get in on all the action. And that promo read means it is time for our parlay pick presented by FanDuel. And for that, we're going back out to Indy to join Jordan Giorgio and Mackenzie Brooks. Good morning, ladies.
Hey, Jeremy. Good morning to you guys in studio. Conference championship weekend, the regular season in the books. We feel confident in knowing who and what some of these teams are. So I feel confident in throwing some money down. And you have a nice little 3-legger to start us off this morning.
Old 3-legger. Now, sometimes we get a little crazy with the parlays here. We're going simple today, okay? Full circle, end of the season. Let's keep things simple. Okay. We're going to start with Iowa State money line, new kickoff, okay? We loved Arizona State versus Iowa State, and we had value on this with Jordan Tyson in the game. Now Jordan Tyson is out for Arizona State. That is their offense. He accounts for 46% of the team's touchdowns. So it is a massive drop-off for them not having him. Their second leading receiver by a mile is their running back in Scatabo. So now we know exactly what the game plan is for Arizona State. Do I think Iowa State's the best team since sliced bread? No. Do I think they have some good value to win this game around even money? Absolutely. And then we're going to go to SMU money line. You know SMU has been my darling all season long. Death taxes,
can do no
SMU
wrong.
Team total over. So I'm actually not going with a team total over. I just am taking the money line here because I understand this is the best defense that SMU has played all season. So I understand that maybe it's not the team total, but I still think ever since that change with Jennings, this team has been on fire. The only time we saw them look weak is when they had like 6 turnovers. And by the way, they still put up 30+ points. So it would take a lot for me to not see this team winning. And then we'll take it right to the Big Ten here. Penn State plus the 3.5. It is so massive that you're getting that 3.5. Can still lose by a field goal and you're still covering that spread. Danny's talked about it a ton. They are certainly alive in this game. I think they're certainly alive as a live dog here. So I love that we can get a plus 3.5 as well. A nice plus 538 payout, Jordan. I know that's not really your style with your like 10-leggers, but for the people at home, this is a nice 10 to win $64.
Sign me up for that. Listen, I'm glad that you have Penn State in there with the spread 3.5. We're here at the Big Ten championship game in Lucas Oil Stadium. We look big picture. We talk about both the teams today. Even with a loss, they're in the college football playoffs. So when we look big picture, a value pick, these are teams that are going to go and compete and potentially win a national title. What's your value pick for the national championship right now?
So for me, it's about predicting what the seeding is going to be and not necessarily always about the talent of the teams. It's about who are you going to draw in these matchups. If Oregon wins today and they get the 1 seed, their first round matchup is a winner of Tennessee, Ohio State. That's a pick-em essentially against one of your biggest rivals in a neutral field. So that's why I don't love an Oregon. I do love a Texas here because they win today. They can be a 2 seed. That puts them in a very favorable first round matchup. But if they lose and we see some other things happen, they still have the potential to be the 5 seed. And you know I love the glorious 5 seed where you get the Big 12 winner in the first round. You get Boise State in the second round potentially if they're the 4 seed. So Texas's path is what I love over Oregon, and that's why I take them. I know they're around the same price right now, but I think Texas is the better play.
All right. There it is. There's a look at the odds to win the national championship.
Georgia.
Listen, I know I was going to say, Jeremy, did you hear that? Texas winning today against Mackenzie's Georgia Bulldogs. We're ready for kickoff here at Lucas Oil Stadium, ready to win some money. And Jeremy, I know that you are locking in this bet back in studio.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, ladies. Make every pass, run, and win mean more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today to get in on all the action. Welcome back to your college football pregame show here on CBS Sports HQ, presented by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We are closing in on kickoffs of 2 conference title games. Jeremy St. Louis alongside Brandon Marcello. Happy to have you along as we are minutes away. Let's get some picks. Let's get some picks from Brandon here ahead of these games. So let's start with the Big 12 championship, 16 Iowa State versus 15 Arizona State in Arlington. This is essentially a pick-em, Brandon, with the total shaded just under 50. What's your pick?
I'm going to go with Arizona State still. Even with Jordan Tyson out, their top receiver being out, Xavier Gilroy has really got to step up for them. But really what gives me a lot of confidence in Arizona State is that they're 10-0 when they score 24 points or more this year. Their defense has been really good. And Iowa State leads the Big 12 in pass defense and scoring defense, but they're dead last in sacks. They've got to get to Sam Leavitt at quarterback for Arizona State to win this game. I don't think they do, and Arizona State pulls out a squeaker.
Arizona State trying to win the Big 12 in their first year. Iowa State just shy of 3 decades in the conference, also gunning for their first Big 12 title. That game coming up in mere minutes. At 4 p.m. Eastern in Atlanta, number 5 Georgia welcomes number 2 Texas in the SEC title game, or an Atlanta Georgia home game, we've been saying. We know how ugly things got when Georgia beat them back in late October. We also know how hard it is to beat a team twice in one season. Texas favored here by less than a field goal. Who do you like?
I like Georgia in the rematch to win the rematch. I really do. For Texas, they're going to have to lean on their defense in this game. They don't have much of a running game. But if Texas can eclipse 150 rushing yards in this game, I think they can win it behind Quintravian Wisner. He's got to have a good game. He's had a roller coaster season. I don't think we're talking enough about him. The last 2 games, he has done a little bit better, and I think that could be something they lean on today. As much as we're talking about Quinn Ewers, maybe he's got an injury to deal with and all of that, they got to lean on their run game and their defense. But Georgia's defense, all those sacks last time, 7 sacks, 4 turnovers, Georgia's defense has them figured out. I think Georgia's going to win this one.
Okay, so here's what happened here then. So Mackenzie decided to take the Texas side of things so that she's not given the Georgia shtick as a Georgia graduate. You take the Georgia pick for her. I'm sure she appreciates that. All
exactly right.
The ACC title game features conference debutantes number 8 SMU against 17 Clemson in Charlotte. Mustangs favored slightly, but we talked about potential home field advantages earlier. You're riding with the Mustangs, or do you think the Tigers get it done?
This is a big-time home field advantage, the biggest, I think, and we'll see all weekend there for Clemson. But the thing is, I've got issues with Phil Moffitt, running back. He's got a slight injury of some sort. He is struggling quite a bit there. SMU's defensive line is one of the better ones in the ACC, if not the nation. Keep an eye on Brashard Smith for SMU. Running back, receiver, he does it all. That's the guy you got to slow down. Not Kevin Jennings, the quarterback. You got to slow him down. I like SMU to come out of this hostile environment and win it because they've got more weapons than Clemson.
All right, lastly, our game on CBS, the Big 10 championship, number 3 Penn State chasing a program-altering upset win over number 1 Oregon, the only undefeated team left in college football. Ducks favored by, what is it, just over a field goal, 3.5. What are you thinking here?
I'm going to go with Oregon. Dylan Gabriel, I'm just done doubting him. I've been following his career like everybody else. He just wins big games. He's a gamer. And to me, he's got to hit 3 deep passes against this Penn State defense. And I had doubts about him being able to do that. And he did it earlier this year against Ohio State. They went after their best cornerback and best safeties, and he was able to hit those long passes. Oregon wins this game in a battle of who's the better quarterback. Drew Aller, second best improvement in passing completion percentage and yards per attempt in college football this season. But Dylan Gabriel is much more consistent. Give the edge to Oregon. The Ducks stay undefeated.
All right, that'll do it for us. Thanks to Brandon Marcello putting in the work here on your college football pregame show on HQ. And of course, the Big 10 championship is the 5th meeting in history between these 2 teams. Penn State leads the series 3-1. This is their first meeting since the '94 Rose Bowl, and we'll see what Penn State can come up with today. Kickoff set for 8 p.m. Eastern time. We'll have updates from all the championship games on HQ all afternoon long.